The nurse who walked into room 407 that Tuesday morning had no idea the man in the hospital bed owned half the commercial real estate in 3 states, and he preferred it that way. Quinn Lancaster watched her enter with the same efficient grace she'd shown every morning for the past 2 weeks. She moved around his room like she belonged there, checking monitors and adjusting his Roman 4 line with practiced ease. Her brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail that swung as she worked, and there was something calming about the way she hummed softly under her breath, so quietly he suspected she didn't even realize she was doing it. "Good morning, Mr. Lancaster," she said, glancing at him with a smile that reached her hazel eyes. "How are you feeling today?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," he answered honestly. The 3rd round of chemotherapy had knocked him flat, leaving him weak and nauseated in ways he'd never experienced before. At 34 years old, Quinn had always prided himself on his strength and resilience. Building his commercial development empire from the ground up had required both. But cancer didn't care about business acumen or determination. Jade Wilson pulled up a chair beside his bed, her expression sympathetic but not pitying. That was one of the things he appreciated most about her. She treated him like a person, not a tragedy waiting to happen. "The 3rd round is usually the hardest," she said, "but you're doing well considering. Your latest blood work shows improvement. Improvement meaning I might actually survive this." He tried to keep his tone light, but the question weighed heavy between them. She met his eyes directly. "Improvement meaning the treatment is working exactly as it should. Your oncologist is optimistic and so am I." Quinn nodded, letting himself believe her. Over the past 2 weeks, Jade had become more than just his nurse. She'd become the bright spot in his otherwise miserable days. She never rushed through her rounds with him, always taking time to talk, to listen, to make him feel less alone in this sterile hospital room that had become his temporary prison. "Tell me something good," he said as she adjusted his pillows. "Something that has nothing to do with blood counts or side effects." Jade paused, thinking. "I saw the most beautiful sunrise this morning on my drive in. The whole sky was pink and orange like someone had spilled paint across it. Made me pull over just to watch it for a minute." "You drove in for the early shift." "I always take the early shift on Tuesdays and Thursdays," she said. "Gets me home in time to have dinner with my mom. She lives alone since my dad passed, and I like to check in on her." There it was again, that selflessness that seemed to define everything about her. Quinn had spent enough time around people to recognize genuine kindness when he saw it, and Jade had it in abundance. She worked long shifts at the hospital, spending her days caring for sick and dying patients, and still found time to care for her mother. He wondered if she ever did anything just for herself. "What about you?" Jade asked as she logged his vitals into her tablet. "When you're out of here, what's the first thing you want to do?" Quinn considered the question. His first instinct was to say he wanted to get back to work, to check on his properties and meet with his development team, but the truth was different. "I want to go somewhere quiet," he said. "Maybe the mountains, somewhere I can breathe fresh air and remember what it feels like to be healthy." "That sounds perfect," Jade said with genuine warmth. "I hope you get to do exactly that." She finished her morning routine and stood to leave, but Quinn found himself not wanting her to go. "Jade," she turned back, eyebrows raised in question. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Her smile was gentle. "That's what I'm here for, Quinn. Get some rest. I'll check on you in a couple hours." After she left, Quinn lay back against his pillows and stared at the ceiling. He'd been in this hospital for 3 weeks now, undergoing aggressive treatment for the stage 3 lymphoma that had blindsided him 6 months ago. He'd gone from running a multi-million-dollar empire to barely being able to walk to the bathroom without assistance. The irony wasn't lost on him that all his money and success meant nothing in the face of this disease. He'd kept his wealth quiet since being admitted. The hospital staff knew him only as Quinn Lancaster, just another patient fighting for his life. He'd paid for a private room and the best oncologist in the state, but beyond that, he'd done everything possible to remain anonymous. No special treatment, no fanfare, no visitors from his business who would inevitably make a fuss. His lawyer and his assistant were the only ones who knew where he was, and they'd been sworn to secrecy. Quinn had learned early in his success that money changed how people treated him. Some became obsequious, others resentful. Very few treated him like a regular human being. But here in this hospital, weak and vulnerable, he was just another patient. And Jade was just a nurse doing her job with extraordinary compassion. There was something freeing about that anonymity, something that made their interactions feel real in a way that most of his relationships hadn't been in years. The days blended together in a haze of treatments and side effects. Jade became the constant that Quinn looked forward to. She worked 3 12-hour shifts per week, and he found himself disappointed on the days when other nurses came instead. They were perfectly competent and kind, but they weren't Jade. On her shifts, she'd spend extra time with him. She'd bring him books from the hospital library when he mentioned being bored. She'd sneak him real food when hospital meals became unbearable, appearing with containers of homemade soup that she claimed were leftovers from her mother's cooking. They'd talk about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from favorite movies to childhood memories to dreams for the future. Quinn learned that Jade had wanted to be a doctor but couldn't afford medical school, so she'd become a nurse instead, and never regretted it. She loved her job despite its difficulties, finding purpose in helping people through their darkest times. She'd been engaged once, 5 years ago, but her fiancé had left her when she'd chosen to care for her father through his terminal illness rather than go on their planned destination wedding. The betrayal had made her cautious about relationships, but it hadn't hardened her heart. In turn, Quinn shared pieces of himself he rarely showed anyone. He talked about growing up poor in a small town, about his mother who'd worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat after his father abandoned them. He talked about his drive to build something meaningful, though he kept the details vague. As far as Jade knew, he worked in real estate development, which was true enough. He just didn't mention the scale of his success. "You have anyone?" Jade asked him one evening as she was preparing to end her shift. "Someone waiting for you at home." Quinn shook his head. "No one. I've been married to my work for too long. Turns out that's not much comfort when you're facing something like this." She touched his hand briefly, a gesture of comfort that sent warmth through him. "You're going to get through this, Quinn, and when you do, maybe it's time to let someone in." After she left, Quinn found himself thinking about her words, "let someone in." He'd built walls around himself years ago, using his wealth and success as both shield and barrier. But here, stripped of all pretense, he felt more himself than he had in a decade. And the person who'd helped him feel that way was a nurse who saw him as just another patient, nothing more. The 4th round of chemotherapy hit him even harder than the 3rd. Quinn spent days barely conscious, his body racked with nausea and exhaustion. Through it all, Jade was there. She stayed past the end of her shifts, sitting with him during the worst moments, holding a basin when he was sick, wiping his forehead with cool cloths, speaking to him in that calm, steady voice that anchored him when he felt like he was drowning. "I've got you," she'd say. "Just breathe. You're doing so well." During one particularly bad night, Quinn opened his eyes to find Jade sitting in the chair beside his bed, her tablet long forgotten in her lap as she watched him with concern. The clock on the wall showed it was past midnight, hours after her shift should have ended. "You're still here," he managed to say, his voice rough. "Where else would I be?" she said softly. "You needed someone. You should go home, get some rest." She shook her head. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Something shifted in Quinn's chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. Something that scared him because he recognized it for what it was, the beginning of falling for someone completely wrong for his situation. She was his nurse. He was her patient. And more than that, she didn't know the truth about who he really was. What would happen when she found out? Would she look at him differently? Would she think he'd been deceiving her? But in that moment, with her hazel eyes full of concern and compassion, Quinn couldn't bring himself to care about complications. He just knew that this woman had become essential to him, as necessary as the medicine pumping through his Roman 4. "Jade," he said quietly, "I don't know what I'd do without you." She smiled, but there was something in her expression that looked almost sad. "You're stronger than you think, Quinn. You'd find a way." The weeks continued, and Quinn's body slowly began to respond to treatment. His blood counts improved. The tumors started to shrink. His oncologist was cautiously optimistic, using words like remission and promising that felt like miracles after months of bad news. Through it all, Quinn and Jade's connection deepened. They developed an easy rapport, finishing each other's sentences and sharing inside jokes. She'd tease him when he was grumpy, and he'd make her laugh with dry observations about hospital life. Other nurses had started to notice, giving Jade knowing looks when she'd spend extra time in his room. One afternoon, Quinn's assistant Marcus called with urgent business matters that required his attention. Quinn took the call reluctantly, speaking in low tones about property acquisitions and development deals. When he hung up, he found Jade standing in the doorway with fresh linens, an odd expression on her face. "Sorry," he said. "Work stuff." "Sounds important," she said neutrally, moving to change his bedding. "It's really not. Just some things that can't wait apparently." She nodded but didn't press, and Quinn felt the weight of his omission settle heavy on his shoulders. He should tell her the truth. But every day that passed made it harder, and he told himself he was waiting for the right moment. That moment came sooner than he expected, in the worst possible way. Quinn was scheduled for a PET scan to check the progress of his treatment. He was being wheeled back to his room when he overheard two doctors talking in the hallway, their voices carrying despite their attempt at discretion. "That's Lancaster's room," one said. "The real estate guy. Made his fortune buying up failing properties and turning them into gold mines. My wife follows him in the business journals, worth something like $200 million. Quinn's heart sank. He glanced at the nurse wheeling his gurney, a young guy named Tom who worked the evening shift. Tom's eyes had gone wide with recognition. When he got back to his room, Jade was there waiting with his post-scan medication. She looked at him, and he could see in her eyes that she'd heard. Someone had already told her. "You should have said something," she said quietly after Tom left them alone. "I know. Why didn't you?" Quinn struggled to sit up, frustrated by his weakness. "Because for the first time in years, someone was treating me like a normal person. Because you saw me as just Quinn, not as someone to impress or use or judge based on my bank account. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Jade set down her tablet and crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "So you lied to me." "I never lied. I just didn't mention certain details. Details like being worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Those kinds of details. Does it matter?" Quinn asked, hearing the desperation in his own voice. "Does it change anything about who I am, about our conversations and the time we've spent together?" She was quiet for a long moment, and Quinn felt panic rising in his chest. He couldn't lose this. He couldn't lose her, not when she'd become the reason he fought so hard to survive each day. "It matters because you didn't trust me enough to tell me," Jade finally said. "I've been here for weeks, Quinn. We've talked about everything. I shared things with you I haven't told anyone. And the whole time you were keeping this massive secret." "I was going to tell you," he said. "I just didn't know how. The truth is usually a good start." She moved to the door and Quinn felt his heart constrict. "Jade, please, don't leave like this." She paused, her hand on the door frame, and looked back at him. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and seeing them broke something in him. "I need some time to think," she said. "I'll send someone else to help you tonight." After she left, Quinn stared at the empty doorway and felt more alone than he had since his diagnosis. He'd survived poverty and built an empire. He was surviving cancer, but the thought of losing Jade's presence in his life felt insurmountable. The next 2 days were torture. Jade didn't come to his room, and the other nurses who cared for him were professional but distant. Quinn learned from one of them that Jade had taken some personal days, something she apparently never did. The guilt ate at him. He'd hurt her with his silence, and he didn't know how to fix it. On the 3rd day, Quinn was sitting in the chair by his window, forcing himself to stay upright for more than a few minutes when there was a knock on his door. His heart leaped, hoping it was Jade, but it was his oncologist Dr. Patricia Moore instead. "Good news," she said with a genuine smile. "Your latest scans show significant reduction in tumor size. The treatment is working better than we'd hoped. If this continues, we might be looking at remission within a few months." Quinn should have been elated. This was what he'd been fighting for, what had consumed every moment of the past months. But all he could think was that he wanted to share this news with Jade, and she wasn't there. "That's great," he said, trying to inject enthusiasm into his voice. "Doctor." Moore studied him with the perceptive eyes of someone who'd seen hundreds of patients. "You're about to get your life back, Quinn. Why don't you look happier about it?" "I might have messed up something important," he admitted. She sat down in the chair across from him. "Want to talk about it?" Quinn found himself explaining the situation, the words spilling out in a rush. Dr. Moore listened without interruption, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You know," she finally said, "I've been treating you for 6 months now. In all that time, I've never seen you look the way you do when Jade is in the room. You light up, and she does too, whether she realizes it or not. I don't think she wants to see me anymore." "Then maybe you need to show her that you're worth a second chance," Dr. Moore said. "You're a fighter, Quinn. You've proven that every day you've been here. Fight for this too." After she left, Quinn sat with her words. She was right. He'd fought so hard to survive, but what was survival worth if he lost the person who'd made him want to live? He reached for his phone and called Marcus. "I need you to do something for me," he said. That evening, Jade returned to work for the night shift. Quinn had learned from one of the other nurses that she'd be back, and he'd spent the day preparing. When she entered his room, professional mask firmly in place, he was sitting up in bed with a folder in his hands. "Jade," he said, "thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "You're still my patient," she said formally. "I have a job to do, I know. But before you do your rounds, could you please look at this?" He held out the folder. She hesitated, then took it. Inside were financial documents, pages of account statements and investment records. "What is this?" "That's a trust," Quinn said. "Set up in your name. Enough to pay for medical school 3 times over, with plenty left for your mother's care and your own security." Jade's face went pale, then flushed with anger. She threw the folder back at him, papers scattering across the bed. "Are you serious right now? You think you can just throw money at me and fix this?" "No," Quinn said quickly. "That's not what this is. Please just let me explain." "I don't want your money, Quinn. I never wanted your money. That's not why I cared about you. I know that." He tried to stand but swayed, still too weak. Jade's instincts kicked in and she moved to steady him, even in her anger. He caught her hand. I know you never cared about my money because you didn't know I had it. That's exactly why this matters. You saw me at my absolute worst, and you still showed up every day. You held my hand through hell, and you did it because of who I am, not what I'm worth. Tears were streaming down Jade's face now. Then why are you offering me this? Because I want to give you something you want, Quinn said desperately. You told me you dreamed of being a doctor but couldn't afford it. I can make that dream possible. Not because I'm trying to buy you, but because I care about you and I want to help you the way you've helped me. You're still my patient, Quinn. We can't. I won't be your patient forever, he interrupted. Dr. Moore told me today that I'm going into remission. In a few months I'll be discharged. And when I am, I want to take you to dinner. As Quinn, just a guy who fell for his nurse, not as some millionaire trying to impress you. Jade pulled her hand away, wrapping her arms around herself. You don't know what you're saying. You're grateful because I helped you through treatment. That's not the same as having feelings for someone. Don't tell me what I feel, Quinn said, his voice firm despite his exhaustion. I've spent weeks in this room with nothing to do but think. I know the difference between gratitude and love, Jade, and I am absolutely, completely in love with you. The words hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Jade stared at him, her hazel eyes wide with shock and something else, something that looked like hope. You can't just say that, she whispered. Why not? It's the truth. I love how you hum when you work. I love how you always pull up a chair instead of hovering over my bed because you want to talk to me like an equal. I love your compassion and your strength and the way you make me laugh even when I feel like death. I love that you called me out on my secrets instead of letting it slide. And yes, I love you, even though I know it's completely inconvenient and probably breaks a dozen hospital policies. Jade let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. This is crazy. Is it? I've been through cancer treatment, Jade. That kind of puts things in perspective. Life's too short to pretend I don't feel what I feel. She was quiet for a long moment, and Quinn held his breath, his heart pounding so hard he worried it would show on the monitors. Finally, she looked up at him, and her expression had softened. I tried so hard not to fall for you, she said quietly. It's completely unprofessional, but every day I came in here and every day you made me laugh or told me something that made me think or just looked at me like I was the best part of your day, and I couldn't help it. I fell anyway. Quinn's breath caught. Say that again. I fell for you, Jade said, moving closer. Even when I was trying not to, even when I knew better. I fell for the man in this room who fights so hard and never complains and treats everyone with respect no matter what. I fell for Quinn, just Quinn. He reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't pull away. Then give me a chance. Take the trust. Don't take the trust, I don't care. Just promise me that when I get out of here, you'll let me take you on a proper date. Let me prove that this isn't just gratitude or circumstance. Let me show you what we could be. Jade looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. One condition. Anything. No more secrets. If we're doing this, I need complete honesty about everything. Deal, Quinn said without hesitation. I'll tell you anything you want to know. My whole life is an open book from this moment forward. She smiled then, that beautiful warm smile that had gotten him through the darkest days of his treatment. Okay then. When you're healthy and discharged and no longer my patient, Quinn Lancaster, I will go to dinner with you. And the trust? He asked carefully. Jade shook her head. I can't accept that. It's too much and I need to make my own way. But thank you for the gesture. It means more than you know that you listened and wanted to help. Quinn wanted to argue, wanted to convince her to take the money because he could easily afford it, and it would give her the opportunities she deserved. But he also understood her need for independence, and he respected it. If you ever change your mind, it's there. No strings attached. She squeezed his hand. I should finish my rounds. People will talk if I spend too long in here. Let them talk, Quinn said, grinning despite his exhaustion. Jade laughed and rolled her eyes. Behave yourself. I'll check on you in an hour. She left, but this time the empty room didn't feel lonely. Quinn lay back against his pillows, feeling lighter than he had in months. He had a long road ahead, more treatments and recovery to endure. But now he had something beyond survival to fight for. He had a future to look forward to, one that included a remarkable woman who'd seen him at his worst and loved him anyway. The following months were a study in patience for both of them. Quinn continued his treatment, each round easier than the last as his body grew stronger. Jade maintained her professional boundaries during her shifts, but there were moments when their eyes would meet across the room and the air would crackle with unspoken promises. Quinn used his time in the hospital to truly get to know her, asking questions about her life, her dreams, her fears. He learned that she'd always wanted to travel but had never left the state, that she collected vinyl records and loved jazz, that her favorite food was her mother's lasagna, and she'd tried for years to recreate it but never got it quite right. That she was terrified of birds but would never admit it to anyone else. In turn, he opened up about his life in ways he never had before. He told her about the loneliness of success, how being wealthy had isolated him from genuine connections. He talked about his mother, who'd passed away 5 years earlier and never got to see him succeed. He admitted that building his empire had been about proving something to the father who'd abandoned them, and how hollow that victory felt now. I spent so long chasing success, he told her one evening as she was adjusting his Roman 4, thinking that if I made enough money, bought enough properties, proved I was worth something, then I'd be happy. But it took getting sick to realize I'd been chasing the wrong thing. What's the right thing? Jade asked. Quinn looked at her steadily. Connection, purpose, love, all the things money can't buy. She blushed but smiled. That's very philosophical for someone who owns half the buildings downtown. Don't sell me short, he teased. It's more like a third. After 4 months of treatment, Dr. Moore delivered the news they'd been hoping for. Quinn was in complete remission. The cancer was undetectable, and while he'd need regular monitoring, he was healthy enough to go home. I'm discharging you tomorrow, Dr. Moore said with satisfaction. Though I have to say, you're the first patient who's ever looked sad about leaving my care. Quinn glanced at Jade, who was checking his vitals one last time. I'm going to miss the company. Something tells me you'll find ways to stay connected, Dr. Moore said with a knowing smile. That evening, Quinn's last night in the hospital, Jade came by after her shift ended. She was in street clothes rather than scrubs, her hair down around her shoulders, and Quinn's breath caught at the sight of her. Hi, she said, suddenly seeming shy. Hi yourself. You look beautiful. She ducked her head, smiling. I thought maybe we could take a walk. You've been cooped up in this room for months. Want to see the rest of the hospital? They walked slowly through the corridors, Quinn's strength still building but improving every day. Jade showed him the garden on the 5th floor, a small outdoor space where patients could get fresh air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I'm going to miss this, Jade said as they sat on a bench surrounded by flowers. The hospital, seeing you every day. She turned to face him. I know we're going to try dating, but I'm nervous, Quinn. What if it's different outside these walls? What if what we felt here was just because of the circumstances? Quinn took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Then we'll find out together. But I don't think it will be. I think we found something real here, something worth holding on to. I hope you're right. "I am right," he said with confidence. "And I'm going to prove it to you, starting with that dinner I promised." They sat together until the stars came out, talking and laughing and simply being together without the weight of illness hanging over them. When a nurse came looking for Jade to ask a question about another patient, Quinn reluctantly let her go. "Tomorrow," she said before leaving. "I finish my shift at 7. Come find me." "I'll be here," Quinn promised. The next day, Quinn was discharged in the afternoon. Marcus picked him up with a car full of paperwork that needed attention and updates on various business matters that had accumulated during his treatment. Quinn listened with half his attention, mostly focused on the clock ticking toward 7. He went to his penthouse apartment downtown, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. After months in the hospital, it felt too big and too quiet. He showered, changed into clean clothes, and tried not to think about all the ways the evening could go wrong. At 6:45, he returned to the hospital. He waited in the lobby, watching staff come and go, until finally he saw Jade emerge from the elevator. She spotted him immediately, and her face lit up with a smile that made his heart race. "You came," she said. "Did you think I wouldn't? I wasn't sure if maybe you'd go home and realize you were free and didn't want to be reminded of this place." Quinn closed the distance between them, wanting to kiss her but aware they were standing in the middle of a crowded hospital lobby. Instead, he took her hand. "The only thing I realized when I got home is that it felt empty without you. Now, are you ready for our first real date?" Jade nodded, and Quinn led her outside to where Marcus was waiting with the car. Her eyes widened when she saw the sleek black Mercedes, but she didn't comment. Quinn opened the door for her, and they drove to a small Italian restaurant he'd chosen carefully. A family-owned place known for its authenticity rather than its prestige. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, they talked like they had in the hospital but without the clinical backdrop. Quinn told stories about his early days in real estate, the risks he'd taken and the lessons he'd learned. Jade shared memories of nursing school and the patients who'd touched her heart over the years. "I have to confess something," Jade said as they finished dessert. "I looked you up after I found out who you were, read some articles about you. And they painted you as this ruthless businessman who never loses a deal. Kind of intimidating, honestly." Quinn made a face. "The press likes drama. Yes, I'm good at what I do and I don't apologize for that. But I'm also fair. I don't believe in crushing people to get ahead." "I know," Jade said softly. "That's not who I got to know. The man I know is thoughtful and kind and funny even when he feels terrible. He tips nurses with terrible jokes and actually listens when people talk. Terrible jokes. I thought those were pretty good." She laughed, and the sound filled Quinn with warmth. This was what he'd been missing his whole life, he realized. Not romance for its own sake, but this specific connection with this specific woman. The ease of being with someone who knew him, really knew him and liked what she found. After dinner, Quinn asked if she wanted to see his place. Jade hesitated and he quickly added, "Just to talk, I promise. I want to show you something." They drove to his building, and Quinn watched Jade's face as they rode the elevator to the penthouse floor. When the doors opened directly into his apartment, her eyes went wide. "Quinn, this is incredible," she said, moving to the windows to look out at the city lights spread below them. "It's too big for one person," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I bought it because I could, because it was supposed to represent success. But it's never felt like home." "What would make it feel like home?" Quinn looked at her, at the way the city lights reflected in her eyes. "You being here helps." Jade turned to face him fully. "You're awfully smooth for someone who spent 5 months in a hospital bed." "I'm motivated," he said, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. Jade, I need you to understand something. I know this is fast and I know it's complicated because of how we met, but I meant what I said. I'm in love with you, really, completely in love with you, and I'll wait as long as you need me to, but I need you to know that's where I stand. Jade's breath hitched. Quinn. You don't have to say anything, he continued. I just needed you to know. Everything I went through, the cancer and the treatment and the fear, it was worth it because it brought me to you. You gave me a reason to fight, a reason to survive. And now I want to build a life that's worth the second chance I've been given. I want to build it with you. Tears were sliding down Jade's cheeks, but she was smiling. You're making it very hard to take this slow. We can take it as slow as you want, Quinn promised. I'm not going anywhere. Jade stood on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. Quinn wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, feeling like all the pieces of his life were finally falling into place. They spent the evening curled up on his couch, talking until late into the night. Jade fell asleep against his shoulder, and Quinn held her, watching her peaceful face and feeling grateful in ways he'd never been before. Not for his money or his success, but for this moment, and this woman and the future stretching out ahead of them. When Jade woke up, dawn was breaking over the city. She stirred against him, blinking sleepily. I fell asleep. You were tired. Long shift. She sat up, suddenly looking worried. I should go. I have to work this evening and I need to check on my mom. Let me drive you, Quinn offered. You don't have to do that. I want to. Besides, I'd like to meet your mother if that's okay. Jade looked surprised but pleased. Really, really. She's important to you, which makes her important to me. They drove to Jade's mother's house, a modest home in a quiet neighborhood. Margaret Wilson was a petite woman in her 60s with the same warm smile as her daughter. She welcomed Quinn without any of the judgment or suspicion he'd half expected. So you're the man my daughter has been talking about for months, Margaret said, ushering them into her kitchen where coffee was already brewing. Mom, Jade said, blushing. What, you think I didn't notice? You came home from work actually happy, talking about this patient who made you laugh. I knew something was different. Quinn liked Margaret immediately. She was sharp and direct, asking him questions about his intentions and his life without any pretense. When Jade excused herself to use the bathroom, Margaret fixed him with a serious look. My daughter has been through a lot, she said. Her father's death, her broken engagement, years of putting everyone else first. If you're going to be part of her life, I need to know you're serious. I am, Quinn said without hesitation. I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything. I love your daughter, Mrs. Wilson, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make her happy. Margaret studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Because she deserves someone who sees how special she is. And from the way you look at her, I think you do. When Jade returned, the three of them had breakfast together. Quinn found himself relaxing in the comfortable domesticity of it all, the easy conversation and shared laughter. This was what he'd been missing, he realized. Not grand gestures or expensive dates, but simple moments with people who cared about each other. The months that followed were the happiest of Quinn's life. He and Jade fell into a rhythm, dating in between her shifts at the hospital and his gradually increasing work responsibilities. True to his word, Quinn kept no secrets from her. He introduced her to Marcus and his small circle of trusted friends. He took her to business dinners and charity events, proudly introducing her as his girlfriend. Jade met his world with grace, never intimidated by the wealth and status that surrounded his life. She asked intelligent questions about his business, offered thoughtful opinions, and wasn't afraid to call him out when she thought he was being too focused on work. In turn, Quinn spent time in her world, joining her for visits with her mother, meeting her friends from the hospital, learning about the parts of her life that had nothing to do with him. 6 months after Quinn's discharge, he invited Jade to spend the weekend at a cabin he owned in the mountains. It was the quiet escape he dreamed about during his treatment, and he wanted to share it with her. They drove up on a Friday evening, the city falling away behind them as they climbed into pine forests and crisp mountain air. The cabin was small and cozy, nothing like Quinn's penthouse, and Jade loved it immediately. "This is perfect," she said, standing on the deck and breathing in the fresh air. "I can see why you wanted to come here." They spent the weekend hiking, cooking meals together and talking for hours by the fireplace. On Saturday night, as they sat watching the stars from the deck, wrapped in blankets against the cool air, Quinn knew it was time. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Jade's eyes widened. "Quinn." "It's not what you think," he said quickly, opening the box to reveal a key. "Well, not exactly what you think. This is a key to my apartment. I want you to move in with me." Jade stared at the key, then at him. "You want me to live with you?" "I know it's a big step, but hear me out. I hate the nights when you're not there. I hate waking up alone and going to bed alone and eating dinner alone. I want to build a life with you, Jade. A real life, not just dates and visits. I want you there when I wake up and when I go to sleep. I want to come home to you every day. What do you say?" Jade was quiet for a moment, and Quinn felt his heart pounding. Then she smiled, that beautiful warm smile that still made his breath catch. "Yes, yes, I'll move in with you." Quinn pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. They stayed on the deck until the cold drove them inside, then moved to the bedroom where they made love slowly, taking their time exploring each other, celebrating this new chapter in their relationship. Jade moved into Quinn's penthouse a month later, bringing her vinyl collection and her sense of warmth that finally made the huge space feel like a home. They settled into domestic life with surprising ease, learning each other's rhythms and quirks. Jade would leave notes around the apartment for Quinn to find, sweet messages that made him smile. Quinn would surprise her with her favorite takeout after long shifts, drawing her baths and rubbing her tired feet. Work became more balanced for Quinn. He still ran his company with skill and dedication, but he no longer let it consume his life. He made time for dinners with Jade, for weekend trips and quiet evenings at home. His colleagues noticed the change in him, how he seemed more relaxed and content. A year after they'd started dating, Quinn's regular cancer screening came up. Despite being in remission, he still got nervous before these appointments, the fear of recurrence always lurking in the back of his mind. Jade held his hand in the waiting room, steady and reassuring. When Dr. Moore came out with the results, she was smiling. "Clean scan, Quinn. No signs of cancer. You're doing great." The relief was overwhelming. Quinn pulled Jade close, holding her tight as the tension drained out of him. That evening he took her to the restaurant where they'd had their first date, requesting the same table they'd sat at over a year ago. "I've been thinking," Quinn said over dessert, "about the future and what I want from life." "And what do you want?" Jade asked. Quinn reached across the table and took her hand. "You. For the rest of my life, I want to marry you, Jade." He pulled out a ring this time, a simple platinum band with a single perfect diamond. Nothing ostentatious, nothing meant to show off his wealth. Just a beautiful ring for a beautiful woman. Jade's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Quinn." "I know we said we'd take things slow," Quinn continued, "and we have. We've lived together for months now. We know each other's worst habits and biggest fears. We've built something real, something that works. And I don't want to waste another minute of this second chance I've been given. I want to spend every day of the rest of my life loving you. Will you marry me?" Yes, Jade said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, absolutely yes. Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her close, kissing her while the other diners applauded. Nothing in his life, not his first million or his biggest deal or any of his professional successes, had ever felt as right as this moment. They were married 6 months later in a ceremony that perfectly reflected both of them. Not a huge society wedding, but an intimate gathering at the mountain cabin where Quinn had asked Jade to move in with him. Margaret was there, beaming with joy, along with Marcus and a few close friends. Dr. Moore even came, joking that she needed to see for herself that her favorite patient had found his happy ending. Jade wore a simple white dress that made her look ethereal in the mountain sunlight. Quinn couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him, this woman who'd saved his life in more ways than one. When they exchanged vows, both of them cried. "You were with me through the darkest time of my life," Quinn said, his voice thick with emotion. "You held my hand through hell and never let go. You gave me hope when I had none and showed me what it means to truly love someone. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of you." Jade's vows were equally heartfelt. "You taught me that it's okay to let someone in, to trust again. You showed me that real love doesn't keep score or hold back. You make me laugh every day and you see me as I truly am and love me anyway. I promise to stand by your side through whatever comes, to be your partner in all things, for all the days of our lives." The reception was filled with laughter and joy. They danced under string lights as the sun set behind the mountains, surrounded by people who loved them. Margaret pulled Quinn aside at one point, hugging him tight. "Thank you for making my daughter so happy," she said. "Her father would have loved you." "I wish I could have met him," Quinn said sincerely. "He would have appreciated what you've done for me," Margaret continued. "That trust you set up, even though Jade refused it, you quietly established one for me instead, didn't you?" Quinn had thought he'd been subtle about that, working through intermediaries to ensure Margaret would be cared for without anyone knowing the money came from him. "I wanted to make sure you were taken care of. Your family now." Margaret patted his cheek. "You're a good man, Quinn Lancaster. Welcome to our family." Quinn and Jade spent their honeymoon traveling through Europe, visiting all the places Jade had dreamed of seeing. They walked the streets of Paris, ate gelato in Rome, watched the sunset in Santorini. Quinn took thousands of pictures of Jade, wanting to capture her joy at finally experiencing the world beyond her home state. "Thank you for this," Jade said one evening as they sat at a cafe in Barcelona, watching street performers and sipping wine. "I never thought I'd get to do any of this." "This is just the beginning," Quinn promised. "We have a whole life of adventures ahead of us." When they returned home, they settled into married life with the same ease they'd found in everything else. Jade continued working at the hospital part-time, finding deep satisfaction in her nursing career, but also enjoying the freedom to choose her hours. Quinn had quietly established a foundation focused on cancer research and patient support, channeling his wealth toward helping others facing the disease that had nearly killed him. 2 years into their marriage, Jade came home from work with news. Quinn was in his home office when she appeared in the doorway, an odd expression on her face. "We need to talk," she said. Quinn's heart jumped, old fears surfacing. "Is everything okay?" Jade crossed to him and took his hands, placing them on her still flat stomach. "Everything is perfect. We're pregnant." The world seemed to stop. Quinn stared at her, processing the words. A baby. They were going to have a baby. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as joy and terror and overwhelming love flooded through him. "Are you happy?" Jade asked, pulling back to see his face. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Quinn said, his voice rough with emotion. "We're having a baby." The pregnancy was smooth, and Quinn was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He accompanied Jade to every appointment, held her hair when morning sickness hit, rubbed her feet when they swelled. He turned the spare bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls himself in soft yellow and assembling furniture with an attention to detail that would have made his construction crews proud. Jade would watch him with amusement and love as he fussed over her. "I survived nursing school and years of hospital shifts," she'd remind him. "I think I can handle pregnancy." "Humor me," Quinn would say. "You saved my life. Let me take care of you for once." Their daughter was born on a clear spring morning, entering the world with a powerful cry that made both her parents laugh through their tears. They named her Rose Marie after both of their mothers, and Quinn fell in love all over again the moment they placed her in his arms. "She's perfect," he whispered, staring down at the tiny face, the delicate features, the small fingers wrapped around his thumb. "She is," Jade agreed from the hospital bed, exhausted but radiant. "We made something pretty amazing." Quinn looked at his wife, this incredible woman who'd given him so much, and felt gratitude so profound it nearly overwhelmed him. 5 years ago, he'd been a lonely millionaire whose life revolved around deals and properties. Then cancer had forced him to stop, to reevaluate, to be vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, he'd found Jade. She'd cared for him through his treatment, not knowing who he was or what he was worth. She'd seen him at his weakest and loved him anyway. She'd taught him what really mattered in life, and she'd given him a reason to fight for every day. As he held his newborn daughter, his wife smiling at them both, Quinn understood that he hadn't just survived cancer. He'd lived through it and come out the other side with everything he'd never known he needed. Love, family, purpose. A life worth living, filled with moments that money could never buy. "I love you," he said to Jade, the words inadequate for everything he felt. "Thank you for saving me." Jade reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "We saved each other." And in the quiet of that hospital room, surrounded by the beginning of their new family, Quinn knew she was right. They'd both been lost in their own ways, and they'd found each other exactly when they needed to. The cancer that had nearly destroyed him had instead led him to the greatest gift of his life. Years later, when people asked Quinn about his success, he would talk about his real estate empire and his foundation work. But privately, he knew his greatest achievement had nothing to do with business. It was the life he'd built with Jade, the daughter they'd raised together, and eventually the son who joined their family 2 years after Rose. They stayed in the penthouse, but bought a house in the mountains near the cabin where they'd been married. They spent summers there, teaching their children to hike and fish and appreciate the quiet beauty of nature. Rose showed an early interest in medicine like her mother, while their son James inherited his father's head for business and numbers. Quinn's cancer remained in remission, each clean scan a celebration. He never took his health for granted again, staying active and mindful of his body in ways he never had before his diagnosis. Every day felt like a gift, every moment with his family precious. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Jade back to the mountain cabin for the weekend, leaving the kids with Margaret. They sat on the deck where he'd proposed and where they'd been married, watching the sun set over the familiar peaks. "You ever regret it?" Quinn asked, pulling Jade close against the evening chill. Marrying a patient, everything that came after. Jade looked at him like he was crazy. Not for a single second. "Do you regret getting sick?" It was a strange question, but Quinn considered it seriously. "I wouldn't wish cancer on anyone," he said slowly. "But I can't regret the path that led me to you. If I hadn't gotten sick, I would have missed this, all of this. I would have kept building my empire and missed what really matters. We would have found each other somehow, Jade said confidently. I believe that. We were meant to be. Quinn kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the warmth of her in his arms. She was right. Whether through illness or fate or sheer luck, they'd found each other. And they'd built something beautiful from that chance encounter in a hospital room. Their children grew up knowing their father had survived cancer, understanding from an early age how precious and fragile life could be. Quinn and Jade taught them to value people over possessions, experiences over things. They traveled together as a family, volunteered at the hospital where Quinn had been treated, and lived lives filled with love and purpose. Quinn expanded his foundation, using his wealth to fund cutting-edge cancer research and support programs for patients and families going through treatment. Jade eventually went back to school, using the trust Quinn had established to get her medical degree. She became an oncologist, dedicating herself to helping others the way she'd once helped Quinn. They worked together sometimes, Quinn's foundation funding research that Jade participated in. It gave them both deep satisfaction to take their painful experience and transform it into something that could help others. Every life saved felt personal, every breakthrough in treatment a victory. On Quinn's 50th birthday, their children threw him a surprise party at the mountain cabin. Friends and family filled the space, celebrating not just his birthday but his 15 years of being cancer-free. Marcus gave a speech about how Quinn had changed after his illness, becoming not just a better businessman but a better man. Dr. Moore, now retired, talked about what an inspiration Quinn and Jade's love story had been to her over the years. But the best moment came when Rose, now 18 and headed to college to study medicine, stood up to speak. "My dad taught me that being strong doesn't mean never being scared," she said. "It means being scared and fighting anyway. He fought cancer and won, but more than that, he fought for love. He fought to build a family and a life worth living. That's the legacy I want to carry forward." Quinn had to wipe his eyes, and he wasn't the only one. Jade squeezed his hand and he looked at her, this woman who'd stood beside him through everything, who'd been his rock and his joy and his home. "Not bad for a girl who just wanted to be a nurse," he whispered to her. "Not bad for a boy who just wanted to prove himself," she whispered back. They stayed at the cabin after everyone left, just the two of them for a few days. On their last night, they lay in bed talking about the future. Rose starting college, James entering high school, their careers and dreams and all the adventures still ahead. "I've been thinking about writing a book," Jade said, "about my experiences as an oncology nurse and then as a doctor. About what I learned from my patients, especially one patient in particular." Quinn smiled. "Am I going to be famous? You're already a millionaire. Isn't that enough?" "Not even close," Quinn said, pulling her closer. "The money never mattered, Jade. You know that, right? It was always just a way to keep score, to prove I was worth something. But you showed me I was worth something without any of it. You saw me when I had nothing but fear and hope, and you loved me anyway." "I loved you because of who you were in that hospital room," Jade said softly. "Brave and funny and kind even when you were suffering. That's who you've always been, Quinn. The money was just noise." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, content in the life they'd built together. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, and the mountains stood silent and eternal. Inside, two people who'd found each other in the darkest of circumstances slept peacefully, secure in their love and the family they'd created. Quinn's cancer had tried to take everything from him. Instead, it had given him everything. A wake-up call that changed his priorities. A reason to slow down and see what really mattered. And most importantly, It had brought him to room 407 on a Tuesday morning, where a nurse with a warm smile and a kind heart had walked into his life and changed everything. He'd been a millionaire who thought he had it all. She'd been a nurse who wanted nothing but to help people heal. Together, they discovered that the richest life had nothing to do with bank accounts or properties. It was built on love, on presence, on choosing each other every single day. Years later, when their grandchildren asked how they met, Quinn and Jade would smile at each other and share the story. About illness and fear, about vulnerability and hope, about a patient and a nurse who found something neither of them had been looking for. They'd tell the children that sometimes the hardest moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be, and that real love sees beyond circumstances to the person underneath. And every time they told the story, Quinn would reach for Jade's hand, and she would squeeze back, and they would remember. The hospital room where it all began. The fear and the fighting and the falling in love. The way she'd cared for him through the worst days of his life, never knowing he was a millionaire, never caring about anything except helping him survive. She'd wanted him to live, and he'd lived for her. He'd fought through treatment and pain and uncertainty because she gave him something worth fighting for. And in the end, they'd both won something far more valuable than any fortune. They'd won each other, and a lifetime of love that grew stronger with each passing year. That was their story, a love born from hardship and nurtured through dedication. It was proof that the best things in life aren't planned or bought or controlled. Sometimes they're simply found in the most unexpected places by people brave enough to be vulnerable and open their hearts. Quinn Lancaster had survived cancer, but more than that, he'd learned to truly live. And Jade Wilson had cared for countless patients, but Quinn had been the one to heal her heart. Together, they'd built a love story for the ages, one that proved that sometimes our darkest hours lead us to our greatest blessings. All we have to do is be brave enough to fight for them.